Okay, everybody, we're going to talk about a topic no one else is talking about, and that is the National Association of Realtors settlement. That just seems to be in the news everywhere. So we wanted to cut through some of the BS.
A lot of misinformation. Thanks to our president.
Well, anyway.
So we're going to clear it up. So a little bit of history on how buyer representation began in our industry. It didn't actually start until the 90s. And the reason that it started was because buyers were going unrepresented and there was a huge influx of buyer lawsuits. So the real estate industry decided that they would make some changes. So if you're a seller, you pay the listing agent to sell your home. So listing agents and brokerages then decided, well, what we can do is take a portion of that and give it to a buyer's agent that brings us a buyer. And let me just say that our commissions did not go up after deciding that. They remained the same. We just cut it in half, gave a buyer's agent half of that commission, so that now we've got two separate parties being fairly represented. Now it seems that we are going backwards as an industry. So let's talk about the changes that will be coming starting in July of 2024. And the first one being that we will no longer be able to advertise in the MLS how much a buyer's agent will be making if they bring a buyer to a listing. So the buyer's agent is going, when they're scheduling, will have to call each listing agent to find out how much they might be getting paid from the seller, if at all.
The other big change is that and this has taken place in several states throughout the country, but in a state like California, for instance, buyer broker representation agreements have really kind of been like an optional thing. Nobody's been required to put a buyer under contract. Now that will change, and it doesn't matter what state you're in, what brokerage you're a part of, what agent you're working with. You, just as a seller has to sign a listing agreement before a home is marketed for sale, you as a buyer are now going to have to enter into a buyer broker representation agreement before you can view homes. So you're going to see a much more formal process with home buying going forward, where you're going to have to meet with your agent, hopefully interview some agents. Whatever agent you select, you're getting locked into a contract that states how much, but it will identify how much they are going to be compensated. So that's a huge change.
You already have to come up with the down payment, closing costs, inspection fees, whatever else, tack it on. And this is going to knock out a lot of first-time home buyers and a lot of low-income families that are just, they're scraping pennies to save money to buy their first home.
You're saying is like we started with buyers not having their own representation. We agree it's a good idea that they did. And then this whole thing started with a couple buyers who said, my buyer's agent's getting paid? My God, I had no idea they were being paid. That means the value of the house was inflated to cover their commissions. So, being sarcastic, because I don't really honestly believe there's anybody out there who bought a home that was unaware that one party was being compensated. So I call BS on that. And now we even have our president chiming in.
Yeah.
What did he say?
He said that for the first time in history, real estate agents' commissions are negotiable. And they've always been negotiable. This is nothing new.
Yeah. So we got to fact check that guy.
Fix that error.
He was wrong. I know it's probably the first time he's ever made a mistake on camera.
Well, anyway.
Never, ever, ever has there ever been a scenario where a listing agreement has ever been created by the state that does not explain how commissions work, that does not disclose that commissions are completely negotiable. And the listing contract also breaks down what portion goes to the other parties. Again, and I forgot to throw this out at the beginning, but this is all our opinion. We're not attorneys, we're not doctors, we're not any of that stuff. This is just purely our opinion. And I think, at least for now, we still have the right or the freedom to say what we want and express opinion. We've talked about how home buying could become a lot more expensive for buyers. if they're having to add a buyer agent compensation to their closing costs. Think of it this way. If I'm a $600,000 buyer in today's market and I'm getting a 6.5% interest rate, the national average in 2023 was a 15% down payment. If I now have to cover additional closing cost, I'm going to have to probably scale that back. The next level down is a 10% down payment. So at 600 with a 15% down payment, 6.5% rate, my payment's about $4,200 a month right now. If I have to put down 10%, but I need to keep my budget at $4,200 a month, I have to reduce that $600,000 offer to you down to like $564, maybe $565. So as a seller, we really encourage you to look at it this way. You will have to make two choices. Are you going to compensate a buyer's agent or not? If you choose not to, you need to understand you are limiting the buyer pool, the amount of buyers that come into your house. For all you know, you're alienating that buyer who's going to give you the most amount of money. A 2.5% commission on a $600,000 home costs $15,000. But again, in that scenario that we just used, if that buyer has to offer you $36,000 less, which scenario are you losing more money in, right? The odd thing about this model that we've been a part of since we got into the industry is it really has, in our opinion, benefited both buyer and seller. Buyer has, been able to get into a home and stretch their budget as far as they can
while being represented
without, the opportunity for home ownership becoming more affordable. And on the other side, even though the seller has, been the one signing the listing agreement with the commission amount that, is divvied up between both agents, you have a larger buyer pool. You've had, pretty much any buyer, a buyer who can't afford to pay an agent and a buyer who can coming to your home, which is giving you the highest bid and really net you the most amount of money. So it's one of those scenarios where it's honestly benefited both buyer and seller. And I don't care what the media says. We all know they're all about clicks. They like to be drama and hype things up because that's what gets people to watch.
Yeah. So are there any benefits? I mean, I personally don't see any benefits for buyers.
I think it starts with the sellers, because if it really starts there. If all sellers decide to compensate a buyer's agent, then there's kind of no issue with, pushing certain buyers away. So I think it starts there. But yeah, I think if all sellers were to say, hey, we're not going to compensate a buyer's agent,
which is what the government wants.
Yeah, which is what they seem to be pushing for, then there's no upside to either. I mean, there's no upside to you as a seller. There's no upside to you as a buyer. They will tell you that one side is saving money or this process is becoming less expensive, and that is absolutely untrue. There is one area I feel like we will see some changes, and that is this is going to drive a lot of agents out of business.
Yeah.
And we've always talked about, I think there needs to be a higher barrier of entry anyways.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, anybody and everybody has their real estate license. I mean, there's a lot of people that just do it part-time. We might get more business from it too. I mean, if it eliminates a lot of these small agents that do 1 or 2 deals a year.
Yeah, and not trying to knock them, but the bottom line is if an agent doing 1 or 2 deals a year negotiates against us or other agents we know that do this full time, they don't do enough transactions and they're not in the business enough to stand a chance negotiating with us.
No.
And so for the buyer that chooses to work with, that agent, it's like you got to look at and say, is that now costing you more money too? So, I think where there could be some benefit is and before I say that, I did hear one agent I really respect had said that this industry is one of the few industries where a brand new agent on day one can make the same rate that an agent with 20 years experience who sold like 2,000 homes makes. You don't see that with doctors.
No.
You don't see it with attorneys. You don't see it in other industries that we like to compare ourselves to. And so I do think like a higher barrier of entry is good. And where I think that could benefit buyers and sellers is specifically buyers, just because in a state like California where you haven't had to sit and interview a buyer's agent and say, hey, what are you actually doing for me? How are you positioning me better than the other agent to get into, the best house for the best amount of money that best fits my budget? So I think you're going to see potentially an increase in professionalism in the process, so that I could see becoming better just by way of seasoned professionals who do this for a full time kind of being left standing. But I would really, really encourage, starting with home sellers, look at the value of including any and every buyer into the home buying process. It starts with you. If you go on the market and you're eliminating a huge portion of those buyers, now not only do these buyers not have the option to buy, but you're going to get less money.
I mean, another good thing is that people will start to realize that we don't just unlock doors and show homes.
Yeah.
I know that's kind of the joke, but I mean, it's really, we do a lot more than that. And this is one of the most stressful industries to be in. Which is why buyer representation started to begin with.
Any advice for either buyers or sellers?
If I was a seller, I would just continue to do business as usual, and offer out that buyer's agent commission in order to get the most value for your home that you're selling. And if that just is the way things keep going and nothing changes, then the market will do just fine.
The biggest piece of advice I could give you is, number one, start treating the process of picking an agent like a much more formal process, just as if you were interviewing an agent to sell your house. Part of your interview process, get past all the how many homes have you sold and, all the flashy stuff, but get down to the nitty gritty and actually talk about hey, Mr. or Mrs. Agent, what is your plan to find me? Here's my criteria. What's your plan to find me a home in my budget that meets all of our specs, but where I'm not having to come out of pocket on that commission? Make sure that agent has a plan where, they're going to be able to, at least up front, present you look, here's what we can show you where a seller is cooperating. Here's a stack of homes where they're not. Of course, it's up to you what you want to see or not, but just make sure that you have an agent who's willing to, dive in, do that homework, who's comfortable negotiating.
They're going to have to negotiate down your side of the commission that you're going to have to pay. So you need an agent that can do that.
Yeah. I mean, our goal for every buyer is to, even if we find a home where they're not offering any compensation, is to negotiate up front and make sure that we're getting, if not all of that, most of that covered for you. And we have experience with that. We do commercial real estate as well. And honestly, that's been the process in commercial for years. More often than not, they're not offering a commission to a buyer's agent. We're negotiating that up front before we're really doing anything on the process. So yeah, make sure your agent's comfortable with that. Last bit of advice would be, reach out if you are, in the next year or less considering buying or selling a home. Just make sure you really understand all these changes too, so you can strategize and figure out, the best way to just kind of maneuver the market, whether that's us or, an agent that you already have. But I think you're going to read and see a lot in the news, and we've already seen probably 3 or 4 bullet points that are complete BS.
Yeah.
Fake news, misinformation, whatever word you like best, but don't get caught off guard. So don't wait until the last second to kind of dive in, start having those conversations even earlier than you would have. I think that's about all I can say.
Yeah. You sure?
That can make it on camera and YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't want the Google machine to cancel me.
Yeah. I mean, I think we covered it. So over and out.
All right. Thanks for watching. Go have a drink now.
Sure am.